That's not my deck. Oh, yeah, it is. That was The Simpsons. Okay, and actually this is a perfect example of what I'm here to talk about, which is embracing uncertainty and the fact that we live in a world where whatever can go wrong will go wrong almost all the time, and everything that we think we can count on when we start a planning cycle changes, underneath our feet as we go through it. I mean, if the last 5 years haven't taught us that, they haven't taught us anything, right? Pandemic, inflation, work from home, return to work, hybrid work, war in Ukraine. I just read this morning even that the next big thing we're all worried about is what's going to happen into real estate and what that's going to do to banks, because 20% of commercial real estate is still vacant. There's $1.2 trillion in regional bank money loaned to into office leases. So there's like this whole new discussion about what that's going to do to the banking system, which I can't even notice anymore because it's like, what are we, 7 days from the country defaulting on its debt? And at the same time, in this world of all this crazy change, all of us are expected to operate inside of rigid annual planning cycles. We get together at the beginning of the year, many companies years in advance, if you're producing something that actually has to be built, and we make a plan for what we're going to do either the next year or the year after that, and then we all know that, like, before the ink even dries, something substantial is going to change. And so figuring out a way to operate in that environment where our plans get socked in the mouth as soon as we get started to work at them is like a critical act if you're going to be, successful in the modern world. And I certainly don't have all the answers, but I happen to be coming out of a period of a company in a situation of a ton of change. And so I thought maybe I'd share kind of a nugget or two of what we've learned. But first, an introduction to me. I'm Matt Powell. I'm the Chief Technology Officer at FTD until tomorrow, and then I'm starting a new job on June 5th and continuing the ongoing uncertainty. My remit is to run our technology division and our contact center division. So I have 215 folks in the US and India on the technology side of the house, and then 75 captives on the contact center side of the house, and then another 100 in a BPO. So I'm dealing with a team that's in the US, India, and in the Philippines, responsible for everything from Ethernet jacks at the desks in the office that we no longer go to, the SaaS products that we sell to our small business florists, our e-commerce property, and everything in between. And my tech teams are cross-functional, so it's UX, product, engineering, QA, infrastructure, all of that in one place. And FTD, for anybody who's under 40 and has no idea what that is a 113-year-old flower and gifting marketplace. And as an interesting aside, 13 florists in 1910 are actually the people that invented the concept of the wire service. So like American Express, Western Union, all of that. A bunch of florists who thought it'd be kick-ass if you could use a telegraph to send flowers from Dallas to Boston in the early 1900s, that day, which is kind of amazing. And so today we serve 90% of American households for same-day, next-day delivery from our fulfillment network. We do most of our fulfillment through a network of 10,000 small business, independent retail florists. Talk about uncertainty. Everybody wants to do business differently, and you have to facilitate that. We do about 7 million orders a year, and those florists are using our marketplace technology, our SaaS technology, for running their e-commerce websites, which we provide, running point of sale, doing local commerce, and doing delivery. And in August 2019, the company went through a bankruptcy. That bankruptcy was really a direct result of a decision a couple of years before that to make a big acquisition of a competitor and get out of just being in the flowers business and get into a bunch of other gifting spaces and get out of doing everything on retail basis and move into dropship. And anybody who's ever been through a merger knows it takes way longer than 4 years to finish them. And before the bankruptcy before the merger was even finished, the company went bankrupt because it couldn't pay its debt covenants. I came in April 1st, 2020, just 6 months after that, into a lot of turmoil, and I started work 7 days after the country went shelter in place, which is really just a long way of, I didn't meet my team for a year. A long way of saying that we live where I've been in the land of uncertainty, and so we've kind of bumped into some things about it that I think can be potentially helpful. So one of the things that when we think about our attack on uncertainty and how we build organizations where change isn't a scary thing, but it's something you expect and are excited about, it really all boils down to one thing, which is empowerment. How do you create an organization where each cellular unit is able to act like a part of the whole? where the DNA for the way that the company works, for its values, how it makes decisions, what's important, is encoded in every cell so that every cell can kind of represent this, this larger organism. Top-down approaches, in our opinion, are way too slow, and they don't have enough throughput, and they don't have the best information available on the battlefield at the point of contact to make the decision. There's too much inertia, and they discourage bravery. They really water down kind of bold ideas. And what we have found is that if you can empower each person, each team, each department to respond flexibly and autonomously in the moment without having to get approval or permission, without having to ask how to act, but in a way that all those actions still ladder up to what we're trying to do, that the outcome is way, way better in terms of results, and it's just a lot more fun. People want agency, particularly I think knowledge workers. You want an ability to feel like you can make a decision and not that everything has to go to committee. And empowerment really is the grease for that. And so when we think about empowerment, there are three things that we try to do. We focus on alignment, we focus on enablement, and we focus on psychological safety. And I'll hit each. But I think the important thing to think about is, what does it look like in an organization if leadership, instead of being a system of control that assumes that the people inside of the organization are inept or at work or lazy, or all of these things that sort of autocratic ways of thinking about companies assume, and instead, if leadership recognizes that its responsibility is to create an environment of alignment, of shared understanding, of shared belief, and of a shared way of keeping score, that something really special can happen. All right. So empowerment starts with alignment. And alignment is really about understanding the difference between a specific set of repeatable rote instructions and what we're actually trying to do. And I love this goofy graphic, even though if you're following along, it's not really the best time in the world to be showing Dilbert graphics, but this is the best version of this graphic I'm aware of. There's one way of going, which is telling people to build a bridge, right? And then they get there, and for whatever reason, it's not a good place to cross the river, where the important thing is we need a way to cross the river, and a bridge may be a terrible answer. And so alignment is knowing that we want to cross the river because we need these folks who are behind us to be able to get from here to there. And it's very, very different than the specificity around saying it has to be a bridge. Empowering people starts with alignment. Aligned organizations have a shared understanding of business strategy, a shared understanding of the executional approach, and most importantly, in my opinion, a shared understanding of how we keep score and how we make decisions. So there was a discussion earlier, a forum about prioritization, and one of the comment got raised that people struggle with backlogs that just fill up over time that you feel like you can't crack into. Designers being frustrated that we've got all these great ideas and they aren't getting prioritized because our capitalist VC and PE overlords don't want to focus on those things. And the same thing happens for engineering teams, where they get worked up about tech debt that no one's ever going to let them touch. And I have found that the key to cracking all of those nuts is to put everything into a common language that works just as well, in my case, in the contact center as it does for making a software engineering decision, that connects to the P&L. So there's none of this subjective debate about how to make a good decision, but instead we can all make an aligned decision with a shared understanding. So because I work for a private equity-owned company, for us it's EBITDA. And we boil every decision down to EBITDA. And every decision can be boiled down to that. If we're building something that makes people more efficient, how many hours are they going to get back? What do those hours translate into in terms of value? How will those hours be redeployed? What is the value of the time that's created through the redeployment? So if you can standardize on a way of the company deciding what's important that everyone can use, then you can start having objective discussions and not subjective discussions about what we're going to do and prioritize next. And then you can start pulling stuff out of your backlog. You have to kind of sometimes pull a 5 whys. It takes a little bit of work to figure out how to do that with some kinds of tech debt. Well, if we build this admin tool, it's going to make this thing easier. Well, all right, let's figure out how much time goes into dealing with the engineering team having to do things that we could do through an admin tool. What's that worth over time? What would it be worth to go faster? So there we go. One of my favorite examples of the power of alignment comes from the invasion of Normandy at D-Day. And so if you think about what happened on June 6, 1944, everything that went wrong for the Allies that really could go wrong. They dropped 13,000 bombs ahead of the invasion. Almost all of them missed their intended targets. The Navy bombed all of the German positions and shelled all the German positions on the beach. Almost no dent. All of the German encampments and reinforced bunkers on the beach were still there. American tanks that were supposed to be able to swim, that were going to provide the armor cover on the beach, all sank because the seas were higher than they were supposed to be. Paratroopers got blown off course and landed all over the place. But in spite of all that, the Allied soldiers had the critical advantage of an aligned understanding, not only of the specific actions they were supposed to take, but the way that those actions came together to lead to an outcome for the Allied armies. The German armies, conversely, were just as well trained, just as battle hardened, but struggled with alignment and empowerment. As one example, one of Hitler's top commanders was a general named Rommel. Rommel had wanted to position all their panzer divisions just behind the beaches so they could be moved very quickly to wherever the landing occurred. Hitler disagreed. Not only that, Hitler had decided that the only person who could release reserves was him. And he was up late on June 5th partying, so he didn't get up until late on June 6th. Reinforcements weren't released until 3 p.m. And as a result, in spite of the fact that heroic fighting was done by Germans all up and down those positions, the Allied army prevailed. All of these soldiers who had landed with units that weren't theirs, organized ad hoc units on demand, recalibrated their mission objectives for each of these sort of pop-up teams that they created in pursuit of the outcome that they wanted to achieve. And I think we all know what happened, as a result of that. That was the beginning of the end of the war in Europe, and it was really a result of the fact that the Allied army had a much stronger alignment and a much stronger position of empowerment that enabled their forces to react to the changing conditions on the battlefield, but in a way that was consistent and laddered up to the overall plan. Alignment also works for companies, not just in the military. Highly aligned companies, and if you Google the power of aligned leadership or anything like that, you'll get hundreds of these things. So I just picked these, but there's tons and tons and tons of stats about companies that are highly aligned, making more money, retaining customers more efficiently, making more profit, growing at a higher rate, and wasting less time in the kinds of things that slow us all down and distract us. I think that one of the things that we've, found at FTD is that when I came into FTD, there was this mountain of software and systems that had to be upgraded. Many things that hadn't been touched in decades. In fact, our ERP system is 40 years old and it has been out of service since before I graduated from high school. Our point of sale system that our members used when I started was 15 years old. And so we have this problem of having to figure out what to do where basically everywhere you look was broken. Everything, in any quarter you could take inside of the tech and product landscape was just an absolute mess. And so how do you make the thousands of decisions that are necessary to quickly drive change? And how do you do that on a private equity timeline, right? Because in an environment where private equity owners buy a 113-year-old company out of bankruptcy, they are instantly expecting you to create value. And so you have to figure out how you get teams aligned and moving in a direction, in a world where there's more to do than you could ever possibly process. And the only way really to do that was to empower people, to get people around an aligned vision, a place that we're trying to go together, and then get them making those decisions. Because otherwise, if you'd approached it through the lens of we're going to do this top-down planning, 3 years later, I'd still be doing that. We wouldn't have gotten anything done. So the next critical tool that we look to that helps to drive this empowerment is tooling for enablement. So how do we create the tools that actually enable teams to operate independently? So if we've created this alignment, everyone understands what we're trying to do, they understand how we're trying to do it, and how we measure success, well then how do we start to actually give them the things that help us to get more out of their time and more out of the attention that they're putting in? And so one of the places that we start thinking about that is with data. How do you make sure that people have access to the information that they need to understand if the things that they're doing are working? What information do people need, does this individual, this team, this department need to make good, high-quality decisions? How often do they need it? How fresh does it need to be? How hard do they have to work to go get it? And then what can we do to make that easier so that it's not this act of like phoning a friend, to get support, to figure out, hey, is this thing that we're trying to do working? But committing as an organization to what metrics are important and then piping them to the people that need them so that they can take their own action without having to ask, someone if they're keeping score. Similarly, what work do people do regularly that gets in the way? What generates a lot of churn? Where is there just a lot of repetitive action on something where too much of our energy is going to this thing that we should see in advance and be able to tool for simplifying? What sorts of things, what sorts of solutions can we design to reduce the friction that goes into the everyday work so that more of our time and attention is available for solving the new and unexpected stuff that's going to show up that we can't plan for? And then how can we build processes that are designed to facilitate change? So like process is a funny word. I bet most people in here are like me and love it, but for some people, process is like a really dirty word, right? It's this like creative, stifling straitjacket. My belief is that process is like the most amazing tool for freeing us from the boring. Back to a military analogy, many militaries of the world are populated by folks who don't have as many other choices, particularly when you think about the rank and file. They do amazing things. How do they do it? Process. Why do people spend so much time learning how to clean a weapon, Because you don't want to have to worry about that if you have a misfire. We're in the middle of a fight. You just need to do it and get on to the more important thing, which is saving your hide. And so, we think a lot about like looking at process and where is process adding friction instead of enabling creativity. And what can we do to engineer into processes the kinds of fluidity and flexibility that are necessary to allow us to react to a dynamic world? And then the last thing that we think about as we consider tooling up our teams to kind of thrive in uncertainty is what we call combined arms, which is just, I believe a lot in putting teams together cross-functionally. And I hate scheduling. When you watch teams doing all this resource planning and alignment and all the context switching that happens with that, it's like, why? Why not just build cross-functional teams? And so for us at FTD, we run these value stream aligned, fully cross-functionally integrated teams. So for example, I have an e-com tech department, and its full-time job is all of our products that point to consumers. So they can convert internet traffic to network demand or network orders. I've got another team that just focuses on my florist customers and just builds SaaS products for them. And in those teams are UX and product and engineering and QA, so that there's no having to schedule anybody. All the teams are built with squads as a cellular unit and then up with an agile alignment as the primary structure and functional alignment as a secondary structure, which can be hard to do, but I think very powerful. Two examples of places where we've tooled for enablement that I think are kind of worth sharing. So when I started at FTD, we had like 5% CMS coverage of our websites, which meant that every time you wanted to do anything to the website, you had to call an engineer, which was particularly frustrating. So I was spending $1 million with Adobe on Adobe Cloud to have 5% of coverage for CMS. For a variety of reasons, we had to re-platform. We re-platformed on Contentful as the CMS. Now we have like 98% coverage in the CMS. But not only that, we also have an integration with our testing framework and Optimizely that means we can run A/B tests from the CMS without having to call an engineer. So that doesn't mean we don't do testing and feature development that requires engineers. It just means that we don't do the boring and repetitive stuff anymore that way. So changing type, changing the layout on the screen, testing headlines, button colors, positions of things, all that can be done by business users, which is a term that I hate because I think everyone's the business user, but I digress. By non-engineers, so that the engineering team's time can be focused on creating value through new features or running more complicated A/B tests, that kind of thing. The other thing that's important about that, though, is not just the free up of the engineering time, but the enablement of the P&L owners to like butter their own bread. Instead of always feeling at the mercy of someone else's schedule, a huge portion of what they need to do to create value, they can do on their own. And similarly, in our contact center, we upgraded from a bunch of more manual tools to a young SaaS company called Gladly. And one of the things that's amazing about that is the CS team went from having to call dedicated Salesforce developers to make changes to workflow and queue management and all the kinds of things that come up in the act of running a contact center to being able to do all that stuff themselves. It's also got all the contact center data in it, so they no longer have to go to finance to see how things are going. They can see in real time, minute to minute, how things are working in the call center and adjust the way that we deliver the product that is customer service in real time with very, very limited developer interaction. And again, that just frees more resources for doing more interesting things. And then the last thing that we think a lot about for empowerment is psychological safety, which can be pretty kumbaya, particularly in private equity and venture. But the reality is, without psychological safety, bad things happen. So there's new research on our brains that indicates that the more time we spend in fear and in stress, the larger our amygdala gets, and the smaller our hippocampus gets. And the hippocampus is where creativity and imagination and problem solving and all this great stuff happens. And the amygdala is the fear center, and it reacts with fear. It's where fight or flight lives. Which condition do we want to be facilitating structurally in responding to dynamic environments? Fear and fight or flight, or creativity, imagination, and openness? And so psychological safety is not just something, cute, progressive, and New Yorkie to talk about, but it's really important if you want to create the kind of conditions where people bring the best of their intellectual machinery to work. Psychological safety is a way that we make sure that people can speak truth to power, that we can hear what's really happening inside of a company, that we can see where the opportunities are to fix things. For example, at my new company, the team was in the Philippines visiting the contact center and talking to a bunch of call center agents that no one had spoken to in a while. And somebody just offhand mentioned, somebody asked what could be done to make their day better, and someone offhand mentioned it'd be great if the websites worked in Safari, which the new CEO, my buddy, started to pick at. And what he learned was the websites don't work in Safari. And most of the calls that they get are people yelling at them about that. And so all of the agents were like, wouldn't it be great if you could just fix that so nobody would yell at us? But they hadn't told anybody for years because they didn't feel like they could. And without psychological safety, people won't. But if you can create a condition where people feel like they can say what needs to be said, then the whole company becomes a sensor that we can all use to make better decisions and design better systems. So how to do that? I'll start with the middle one there, blame who, not how. I generally think that the act of figuring out if a person is the problem or not is like an HR act that's character-driven and really about whether or not a person fits into a team, and it should almost have no role in looking at when things go wrong on a day-to-day basis. It's like we either have the right people or we don't. If there are people, and we're not going to blame them. Instead, we look to the process. Where did our way of working not manage this condition, and how can we change our way of working so that whatever went wrong is something that we can absorb? And so if you approach when things go sideways through the lens of our processes are brittle and as a training ground for making process better, then that gets people feeling comfortable and feeling safe, that they don't have to worry about being in the spotlight or with a target on their back simply because something went wrong or because they said something they shouldn't or whatever. The next one that I'll hit is the leadership vulnerability point. I have found that part of making people feel safe is to demonstrate that when you're in charge, you're like not a robot, like you're a regular person. Sometimes you didn't get a chance to shower before work, and so you're on the camera that way, and sometimes your kid bites your leg while you're doing your thing, and sometimes you don't know the answer, and so we do these town halls every month, and we take anonymous questions from the team because anonymity can make people feel safe and create space for talking that people wouldn't do otherwise. And we answer all the questions, which feels like such a dumb and obvious thing, right? But I've been working for 25 years, and I think at every other company I've been at, we wouldn't have done that. We pick which are the questions we feel comfortable answering. We sweep the rest of them under the carpet. But somebody asked, and if somebody asks, somebody else has the question. If you're not willing to step into those things, then you're not being transparent, and you're not being vulnerable, and then nobody feels like they can be either. And so if you want to make people safe, I think you have to be willing to have the conversations that people want to have, and to say the things that are true, even if they're hard to say, and then to say that you don't know when you don't know. And so we found that those two things work together really effectively to help make people feel safe too, just in terms of the way that we engage with them. So that's it. That's my 20 minutes, which always go by so fast, particularly when the screen is flickering at you. We see empowerment as the antidote to uncertainty. I think even in a certain environment, the empowerment and this way of thinking about structuring and organizing and motivating teams and running teams, I think works best. And it really boils down to alignment, enablement, and psychological safety. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Matt. I loved that. I think, when you talk about empowerment, alignment really allows for people to go and do their best work, enables them to execute on that. And when people are working together, aligned, collaborating, they can develop that sense of psychological safety within their teams. So it's fantastic.
Thank you.
We have time for questions,
Great.
So please ask Matt. Raise your hand. I will gently pass this box that way. So we will pass it to you first, and then you will pass it back right there in the orange. Awesome.
I love that thing. The beach ball microphone is a great invention. It feels like it should be at parties.
Oh, and before we go, sorry, really quickly, we have some online questions that I have been unfortunately neglecting. So.
Yeah, right now, actually, we don't have online questions, but if one comes up, I'll definitely get your attention.
Fantastic.
Thanks.
All right, awesome.
It's okay.
You're up.
Yeah.
Okay. Hi, I'm Anne. You had said something about the way you structure teams to reduce context switching, and then you said da-da-da-da-da-da-da. I'm just like, wait. How did he do that? So can you repeat that?
Yeah, so alignment, I'm way too fast a talker, and it's worse when I'm nervous, and everything went to Plaid over here, so I apologize for that. So I think that it's incredibly powerful to cross-functionally align teams whenever you can, because it just gets you out of the scheduling game. And generally speaking, you have a two-dimension matrix you're dealing with. There is a role for functional alignment, for career development, mentorship, career ladder, all that stuff. And then, there's the kind of team alignment, the people you're going to do the work with. Many organizations prioritize the functional alignment and then assign people to teams on a temporary basis. I think the challenge with that is where do people believe that they're anchored, and what do they think of as their team? So I think when you flip that, so that's what we do. We call them domain-aligned organizations that are fully cross-functional. And then the functional things are centers of excellence. So my Java engineers get together sometimes and talk about how we're going to Java, and that's great. And the architects even spend more time making sure that we're thinking about enterprise patterns the same way and stuff like that. But that is secondary to their alignment underneath their domain-aligned function. And that does all sorts of great stuff. I think if you're, as an individual contributor, as a person doing the work, if your metrics and KPIs are functional and functional alone, you can never tell how your work ladders up to what the business is doing. If you domain align as your primary way of aligning teams and you sit cross-functionally, my entire squad will have the exact same goals for the year, right? So my ecom tech department has 3 squads. Each of those squads is working on different aspects of value we're trying to create in our consumer front end. That whole team, each of those teams shares the KPIs for whatever the KPI period is. So what that means too is you don't have a lot of these problems that you get when you're organized the other way. You're working through a sprint, the devs are done their work, QA is behind. Functionally aligned with functional metrics, what do people do? Kick their feet up. If the whole team is measured based on value contribution against the domain, then what happens is the developers start doing QA or writing tickets against the next sprint or whatever else can be done to help facilitate the team's success. Baseball teams win or lose together. Football teams win or lose together. It's not like the quarterback can win and everybody else can lose. And so I believe that teams should be designed the same way. And I think that at whatever elevation you can get that done with, you'll benefit. And if you can't do it because the organization resists it, then what I would go do is build strong partnerships with the other people that look like me in the functional areas and convince them that we should try to do something that's as close to that as possible.
Thank you. Awesome. Right behind you.
I have a specific use case. So I lead a team that's abroad, and we have limited touch points.
Yeah.
How, in this use case, would you best empower and align with them, given those limited touch points?
So we have some of those problems too, because I have, when I started at FTD, 50% of my team, 60% of my team was US. Now it's 71% India, and that's been intentional. The big mistake that we made initially was not thinking through the way of working as a foundational thing. And so we had, 8-person Scrum teams that had 2 people in one country and 6 people in another. we tried that for a year. We thought it worked, but it was bad for quality of life. And so we flipped that, and we geographically aligned all of our teams. So if you're working, and it's same kind of thing, with no resource sharing, so full Scrum team per country if we're going to do it or not. And that helped a lot. And then the empowered way of working. So you still have all these touch points you have to do. For some teams, it works best because of their parents, and they want time in the middle of the day with their kids to do an early block and a late block and have space in the middle. And I don't care, as long as the squad hits their targets, they can figure out the way of working. And that's true at each elevation of our organization too. So the VP who runs my ecom tech department is a night owl. He plays video games until 4 in the morning anyway. He does all of his leadership syncs with his team between 11 p.m. and 2 a.m. and then goes back to playing video games. That's what makes him happy. And I don't bother him before 10. There's another guy who runs the SaaS side of things, and he is a morning guy. He's up at 5 a.m. anyway. So he does all his meetings from 5 a.m. to 8 cross-function, with his people offshore. And then I've got offshore people who do it, all different ways. And so I think that part of the key is if you align the organization around what it's trying to do and you set boundaries for how we treat each other and what's important to us, you can say to the team, what makes sense? And I want to hear from a Scrum Master sometimes, hey, we all get along great, but these 2 people are night people, these 6 people are morning people. We got to change, bring us some early birds. This isn't working for us. And great, you just shift it around. So I think that I guess short answer, there's no easy answer. It's all situational, but I do think try to design for the reality and recognize that time zones are a real thing, body clocks are a real thing. And I think rather than fight them, just lean into them, whatever that looks like. I have to run some people on shift work. We're putting a program in place to pay extra for that, because if you're going to have people working late, we'll have a bonus for that, and then we'll just make it, we'll let people choose. And so for one team, everybody wants to take a turn in the rotation, great. If on another team it's just 2, because they're younger and they need the money and they've got, whatever, I don't care, whatever works for the team.
So way back here, I was kind of curious on your tooling. You had a bunch of things in your bullet points that were for frequent change. And I'm curious, what's your criteria that defines a tool or a system as for frequent change, or even conversely, what do you notice when something is not built for frequent change that's a red flag for you not to adopt it or let it into your system?
Well, I think one of the things is how often do you make a plan where that there's things in it there's no hope for, from the minute you write it? You're making an annual plan for feature commitments for something that's not well understood. It hasn't been spiked, it hasn't been researched. And you're making the commitment because someone has told you they want a commitment, and so you're giving them one, but that you may as well just throw the dart and hope it lands. Those are the kinds of things that give us red flags. An environment where the planning demand refuses to accept the planning reality. And so what we try to do is again, play the 5 whys game to figure out a way to find something that where the interests overlap. So team A is committing to driving revenue growth, and they need features from team B to do that. The normal way to do that is commit to those hard features. And I've done this before. You commit to team B is going to do these features on these dates, and team A goes, great, we're going to go sell that. And then a week later, somebody from team A calls you and goes, hey, so I got this new thing, and if we could just have one of these next week, I can sell a bunch of other stuff. And it's well, no, sorry. You already told me that you wanted this other stuff last week, and I made a commitment, so we're not going to change it. And what we've moved to instead is okay, you've said that you need these features, and if you get them, you can add 20% subscribers. So we're going to sign up together for 20% subscriber growth, together. We're not going to commit to what the features specifically are, but I fail if you don't get your growth, and you fail if you don't get your growth. And then we agree to what we think the next most important things are that are going to help us achieve that, and we start working on those things. And then when they make the phone call and they say, well, I just discovered this other thing, you go, great, which of the things on your own list do you want to change it with? And now we're having a different conversation about how we get to the end game, and it starts to be fun. I used to hate those phone calls, and my brother runs our sales organization, and he's my little brother, and he's far handsomer than me and fitter than me. It's so irritating. And then he calls, he's like, hey, that plan you committed to, I need to change it because there's a bunch of money over there. Now it's a fun call because he's got some new opportunity that we're both going to win more easily with, and we can pursue it. So like, those are the kinds of things, like trying to figure out a way to metrically commit to things that have flexibility built in so you can change the plan. And then the other thing that this makes me want to share with you is we think a lot about really, really firm commitments on the quarter base, on a sprint and quarter basis. Like disrupting a sprint is like evil to do to a product organization. It should never happen. So we try to never break a sprint. We try to almost never break a quarter. And past that, we don't really worry about it that much. We try to plan quarterly with a rolling 12-month look so that we have a sense of where we're going next. But nobody cares if we have to change what happens after that. And we do breach the quarter plan from time to time, but we try not to. And that's kind of how we try to work it.
All right, fantastic. Okay, so thank you so much, Matt. Let's give him another round of applause, please.
Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much.